Today we are going to finish up our rational section with section 5.6, solving rational equations. So we'll be solving equations that have fractions in them. Basically, there's going to be two types of problems that you're going to come across. First type is when you just have one fraction equal to one fraction. In that case, we just cross multiply. That's something we've been doing for a while, so it should be pretty familiar. Just don't forget to distribute, FOIL, whatever you need to do when you multiply. If we have a plus or minus, meaning that we have more than one fraction on the side, then we want to multiply by the least common denominator. To find the least common denominator, look at each denominator and just make sure that each denominator is included in your least common denominator. So in this example, we would need an x in my least common denominator and a 4 in the least common denominator. When you multiply through by the least common denominator, it should cancel out all the other denominators, and it should leave you with something that's easy to solve. Sometimes to solve that last part, you might need to factor or use the quadratic formula. That's going to be the case whenever you have an x squared and an x left in your problem. Those are both things we've been doing all year back in chapter 1, so you should be able to do those. And then lastly, with all problems, especially ones that have an equation, we want to make sure that we check because we might run across those extraneous solutions. We've done everything right, but we ran into a problem with our fractions, especially getting 0 in the bottom. So you want to plug your answers back in to check, make sure that they work. If they don't work, like -3 in this case, gives us a 0 in the bottom, just cross that off. Looking at a few examples. In this first example, since we just have one fraction equal to one fraction, we can cross multiply. That gives us 2x when we multiply the one way. 4x plus 8. Don't forget to distribute the 4 to both the x and the 2. Subtracting 4x from both sides gives us -2x is equal to 8. Dividing both sides by -2, we get -4. Plugging that back in, the first fraction will become a -1. The second fraction will have -2 on top, divided by 2, which is also -1, so that one works. In the second set, once again, we still have one fraction equal to one fraction, so we can cross multiply. When we cross multiply the first way, we get 4x plus 20. When we cross multiply the second way, make sure that you do FOIL, since it has two terms being multiplied by two terms. So we would get x squared plus 1x minus 1x, and then minus 1. In this case, our two middle terms are going to cancel out. That won't always be the case, though, so make sure you do FOIL when it's a binomial times a binomial. Cleaning things up, we get 4x plus 20 is equal to x squared minus 1. As soon as you see x squared and an x in your problem, that should clue you in to setting our equation equal to 0. I would leave x squared where it's at. I would subtract 4x over to that side, and then subtracting the 20 and combining that with the -1 gives us minus 21. From here, you can try to x factor or use the quadratic formula, whichever way you find easier. This one does x factor. X factors down into x minus 7 and x plus 3. Setting both of those equal to 0 then gives us 7 and -3. Checking both of those, when I plug in 7, I get 4 over 8, so 1/2 on this side. I get 6 over 12, which is 1/2 on this side. Plugging in -3 gives me 4 over -2, which is -2. -4 over 2, which gives me -2 as well. So both of those work. Last example, whenever there's a plus or minus in our problem, not just one fraction equal to one fraction, we cannot just simply cross multiply. So this is where we need to come up with the least common denominator. Before you do that, I would factor any denominators that you can. So this x minus 9 would factor down. Difference of squares, x plus 3, x minus 3. That just lets us see what's in each denominator, so we make sure that we include that in our least common denominator. So to come up with our least common denominator, I just go through and look at each denominator and make sure that I include that in my least common denominator. So x minus 3 is one of our denominators, so that needs to go in my least common denominator. X plus 3 needs to be included. Our goal here is to get all the fractions to cancel, so if this x minus 3 is going to cancel, it has to be included in what I'm multiplying. X plus 3 has to be included, and then looking at our last denominator, x plus 3 is already there, x minus 3 is already there. So this is our least common denominator in red here. As long as we multiply that through by all three parts, that will keep my equation equal. So I simply multiplied all three parts by that same least common denominator. In the first multiplication, the x minus 3's will cancel. Leaving me with 4 times x plus 3. In the second multiplication, the x plus 3's will cancel. Leaving me with plus 2 times x minus 3. And on the right side, the entire bottom will cancel. Leaving me with just 2x plus 2. Distributing, I get 4x plus 12 plus 2x minus 6 equals 2x plus 2. Combining my like terms gives me 6x plus 6. Subtracting 2x from both sides gives me 4x. Subtracting 6 from both sides gives me a negative 4. And dividing leaves me with negative 1. Make sure you go plug that back in to your original problem. This one does check out, so that is our final answer. Some of these problems are a little bit long, but if you take it step by step, it's really nothing we haven't done before. As always, as you work, if you have any questions, please email me or send a Flipgrid, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.